All right, we are all
Right.
set.
Great. Well, so thank you everyone for coming to this talk. I have personally been extremely excited to talk about this work. Ever since Open at RIT started as an official center of excellence early or late last year, and I was brought on as a staff member in January, I really feel like a lot of the stuff that we're going to discuss here sums up essentially the last two very crazy semesters, and in particular shows off the work of my co-presenter, Django. So with that, my name is Mike Nolan. I'm the Assistant Director of Open at RIT, which, as I said, is a center of excellence within the Rochester Institute of Technology, focused on all things open within the university. I'm joined here by my co-presenter, Django, who is a strategic designer who has helped us build a playbook that essentially describes our methodology of how we go about working with various faculty members and staff on their open projects and creating, building, and sustaining communities around that work. So Django, if we could go to the next slide. So as I said, Open at RIT is dedicated to kind of fostering the collaborative engine of open across the university for both faculty, staff, and also students. Our goals are to discover and grow the footprint of RIT's impact in all things open. And this is including, but not just limited to, things like open source software, but also open data, open science, open hardware, open educational resources, and Creative Commons licensed efforts. We like to refer to this in aggregate as just open work. Next slide, please. So, RIT has been doing open work for quite a long time. I actually did my undergrad there starting in 2011, which looking back was quite a while ago. And so we provide a variety of services now that we're an official center. We do things like educating faculty, staff, and students, both through our academic minor and immersion in free and open source software, but we also curate public reading lists using software like Zotero, develop university policies, and other things like that. We maintain dedicated digital infrastructure for helping build, maintain, and grow open communities, hosting software, or at least, providing support for software like Nextcloud, Mattermost, GitLab, Grimoire Lab, and other things like that. Lastly, we provide a number of individual assistance and consultation services, maintaining a year-round team of designers, developers, product managers, and technical writers to help faculty and staff developing their communities further. And this is really what I want to talk about today. Next slide. And so these services are what we call our Open at RIT Fellowship. So this standing team that we created consists entirely of students hired through our LibreCorps cooperative education program, which aims to help place students into paid roles in which they get to develop open work. The Open at RIT Fellows program awards the services of that team to provide consultation and assistance to our fellows in order to foster the creation and expansion of contributor communities around their projects. We believe that this work can help enhance the visibility, impact, and translation of our fellows' efforts further beyond what their initial research has done. Next slide. So every piece of work in every associated community has its own specific struggles and goals. And so because of that, our services are oftentimes tailored and dependent on the specific needs and circumstances of each fellow. However, in general, our fellows have some combination of these three goals here. In general, you can think of our services as a sort of accelerator program focused on building, launching, or maintaining these open communities. Next slide, please. And so the kind of projects we work on in terms of subject matter are extremely varied, right? It goes beyond just open source software packages, trying to gain more contributors or make the contribution project process easier. We have worked with or are planning to work with projects like an openly licensed data science educational resources for teachers to kind of pick and choose to build their own curriculum based upon available resources and slides online. We also have projects like a bunch of 3D scans and corresponding 3D recorded audio from animals and trees and things in the Madagascar rainforest. We have things like GIS data and geographically tagged stories of alcohol smugglers in Prohibition era Rochester, or even things like gravitational waveform data of binary black holes. So the kind of communities we're building are massively varied across all sorts of different disciplines for all sorts of different reasons. But we believe that we can kind of create a methodology that is flexible enough for us to be able to engage with all of these. It also makes for just really exciting work, if I might say my opinion there. Next slide, please. And so lastly, I really want to emphasize that we aren't starting from scratch here. We are really lucky to be able to build upon the shoulders of giants, and we try to cite existing research in this area of building open communities. And most importantly, that we've used so far in the creation of this specific methodology, I really want to point out the importance of the Mozilla Open Leadership Training Series, as well as Nadia Egbal's book, Working in Public, which has really been foundational for how we try about interacting with our faculty and staff and making sure that they can achieve their goals. So to talk about the specifics of how we do this, I want to hand it off to Django, who was the lead designer in creating this playbook and our methodology that we're using today. So Django, please take it away.
All right, for sure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology itself, and then I'll give a brief overview of the process that we went through to develop it. To start, we've broken the main consulting process down into 3 steps. We have contextualizing, we have identification of stakeholders, and we have understanding shortcomings. So that's our full step process end to end. It's very easy, right? So first step would be contextualization. What is this about? We want to identify the scope of the main project as well as its long-term goals. Oftentimes, the goals that the fellows come to us with aren't necessarily the end goals of their full project. And so we want to flesh out all of the important context that's going to inform the further steps that we take when consulting. We want to understand how the community is currently contributing, what sort of community is currently being established, and to that end, we move towards identification, which now this was heavily informed by the Mozilla Open Leadership Series, specifically Section 3, Building Communities. So without that understanding of this process, our methodology would have been completely different, and I wanted to throw that out there. So what we want to do is we're trying to identify stakeholders and the contributors, and how those are attracted. And once we understand a series of archetypes about our contributors, we can start to understand their own personal needs and wants and goals. And when we compare and contrast that with the project's needs and wants and goals, as well as interviews with real contributors, we can start to identify gaps in the contributor pathways. And that lets us spot the shortcomings. So this is the how can we help phase. For the most part, our packaged assistance falls into one of the following categories: project documentation, marketing inbound materials, feedback systems, or outreach and networking strategies. So let's say the project leads are being contacted for assistance really often, and it's taking away from the time that they have to actually work on their project. So maybe this could be solved by implementing better documentation in the processes in question. Sometimes project contributors just vanish into the depths of a half-maintained website and they're never to return. And so we offer the development of things like community landing pages or better optimized UI UX that is done by our designers that we retain. We also design feedback systems. Sometimes we provide assistance just in setting up a proper GitHub page, or we offer our analytics platform Mystic, which utilizes Grimoire Lab through Chaos to specifically provide community analytics for the project at hand. And lastly, we try to develop outreach and networking strategies because we don't want to see projects that could be very interesting provided the proper community is established fade away if people don't hear about them correctly. So I want to talk a little bit more about shortcomings. In the design world, we have this thing called problem statements, and they're a broad stroke reframing of presented problems in a way that provides for ground up solution development. kind of what that means is that it exists in a way to help an agency that holds and shepherds a project from the beginning to the end of the entire process reframe the problem over and over and over again so that they can best accomplish a full task. What we're doing, and I'm going to talk on this a little bit later, is pragmatic consulting. We identify points of disconnect in the contributor pathways and we work on solving them. The scope of the overall work is not going to be impacted by the work we do, but the experience of working on the project will be. That's important. So here's an example. Dr. Baptiste has developed this application that allows educators to create interactive video enhanced tutorials, as well as a series of physics tutorials that use his own application. He wants to better grow and understand his community in the broader sense. So what did we do? Well, we developed a series of personas based on interviews with his clients. So we talked to members of his community. We talked to people who learned about the project from him, as well as people who learned about the project from other individuals online. And to do so, we really we gained a lot of understanding about the overall process. Once we do that, we can identify a series of archetypal stakeholders, which are identified as personas. Those personas are then used to best understand the paths the community members take through the project by identifying the needs and goals and background of each of the specific archetypal personas. So from there, we actually start to provide user experience feedback, understanding the background of the individuals that we are designing for. So in this case, we ended up analyzing the materials provided and the diversions between observed and ideal contributor pathways, and ended up providing a whole bunch of recommendations for improving the user interface so that we could improve the user experience of the application that he's developing. Right. So this was a really important exercise in holistic analysis of an overall pragmatic system. If you're not familiar with it, this system right here is the path of design thinking as it was first set out by IDEO. It's an iterative process that encourages participants to generate an overview of a problem before developing a definitive solution. It's designed for broad strokes, holistic approaches to sometimes hard to describe problems, which then develop specific solutions. So the user follows a path from empathy to definition, ideation, prototyping, and then testing before using all of the findings from that full process to redefine the problem and start over again. For those of you familiar with the scientific research process, it's a similar process. The thing is that we are not a holistic agency. We do not observe a project from the first definitive step to the last, and we don't launch companies or oversee the design of a new vegetable peeler for arthritic hands from the beginning stage to the marketing stage, right? We consult on projects that want to better understand or support the community that surrounds them. To that end, we are a pragmatic consultancy. We identify shortcomings and we fix them. We're not interested in the societal reasons behind our work. That's the job for our fellows, and they work out problems to solve and come to us with them so that we can streamline them. But I'm a holistic designer. I was hired specifically for this purpose. So in approaching this project, I had to look at the pragmatic consultancy through a holistic lens. What do we do? Why do we do that? What are our end goals? And most importantly, what do we think about as we're working on every project? I had never worked in open source before. This was entirely new to me. So much of the terminology and the methodology was entirely unfamiliar. And thankfully, OpenEd RIT has experience teaching other people about this. So I got to learn firsthand through OpenEd RIT, get the learning experience from OpenEd RIT about the whole system. And I got to read a bunch of foundational knowledge, as well as the internal documents for, onboarding our design team, onboarding our developers. And I was able to use it as a model to compare it to the work that I had done in my undergrad. I had to work backwards rather often to understanding specific steps so that I could understand the philosophy behind said specific steps. To that end, the most important thing that I did was listen. It's so often the most important thing, and for me, this was hugely the most important step of my process. I spoke often and at length with every client-facing member of our team, reviewed material presented by my directors, annoyed them with questions constantly. Okay, so why do we do that? Is that how it always works? Could you maybe tell me about a time that it didn't work like that? They didn't get sick of me, and it actually ended up producing something really great. And much like the macrocosm of our community, interacting with our clients, I understood that my colleagues understood their position far better than I ever could. And I was able to use that to my advantage. In teaching me about their work, they taught me about how they thought about their work. And that's key. I was able to take all of that information and condense it into a summarization of our philosophy. And our playbook is just that. It's not a tutorial for how you can do what we do, but rather an explanation of how we think, what we're thinking about, and how we can come to understand our clients better. In short, it's a holistic look at a pragmatic consulting process. So, again, what was the most important step in that process? I listened. This is the most important thing you can do in anywhere in the sector, is to listen to your stakeholders. They'll tell you everything you need to know, even if they don't always fully realize it. And this project is a really prime example. Through talking with my directors, I came to understand the philosophy behind Open at RIT and the broader open source community as a whole. Through talking with our design team, our copywriters, and our developers, I came to understand how we think about our work and how we do what we do. That exact methodology informs everything in this project. So if I leave you with one thing, it is this: listen, take notes, and ask questions. And question what you think you know. Thank you.
Great. And so, as one last thing before we open it up for questions, because I would like to see if other people have any questions, and we wanted to leave a bit of time at the end. But first things first, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Django is a recent graduate from RIT and is currently seeking full-time work. I can certainly say, as a person who has worked with him regularly every day, that Django has been a fantastic addition to our team, has delivered what I think is some very fine work, and has been, extremely talented and great to work with. So if you are looking for someone that with the experience of doing design work or project management, Django would be an absolute catch. And so his information is here if you'd like to reach out. I honestly cannot recommend enough if you are looking for a designer, especially in the field of open, given that he has worked with us over the last semester to do so.
And come talk to us at OSPOCon too. We'd love to answer more questions, and we'll have a version of the playbook up for you guys to look at, hopefully.
Yes.
Now, does anyone have any questions? We'd love to answer anything you've got.
I believe, I'm not sure the muting capabilities or not. You may have to put your question in the public chat, but please feel free to, Vladimir, if you unmute people, or I know there's the hand raising functionality. I'm not quite sure how to drive big blue button from the administrator standpoint, but yeah, feel free to unmute people as necessary.
This is a really great platform, though. I've never used this before, and it ended up turning pretty intuitive, so that's pretty great. I think the biggest surprise during this work, Amanda, was how much of it seemed like it would fall in line with design work and then kind of just switched around. Like, actually abstracting a lot of this to a holistic standpoint was extremely difficult. And Mike can attest to this too. How much I actually ended up having to strike out because you'd start writing things down that started to actually get into specific inbuilt tutorials, and that wasn't what we were going for. So maybe it was difficult, but it was also like really shocking to figure out how little you have once you pare it all down if you're not thinking about the philosophy behind it.
I would agree with what you said there, Django. Certainly, the biggest struggle, thinking about these things from my perspective, was balancing the whole structured. We want to create a very structured playbook that other people can follow. But what we found a lot in the implementation is there needs to be a degree of flexibility, especially with like the wide variety of projects that we were working with. A lot of time when we look at guidance from OSPOs, really, a lot of it's very structured about certain documentation types and formats and things like that. And so I think the knowledge of design theory that Django brought to our team was like really fundamental in being able to kind of tackle that battle between structure and structurelessness.
I think that, and one of the biggest things that I've been thinking about a lot during this whole process is how remiss we are to not have more designers in the open source world. There is a wealth of information and understanding in the design world that's entirely different from what I see here. And I think that we need more open source moving into design because designers don't get that. I never had any exposure to any of this in my undergrad whatsoever. And it was hugely eye-opening to see this world that had been existing kind of entirely separate from my own, since the 80s. And learning all about that was extremely important.